Welcome to the Flynn Brothers podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Jimmy. Today's big idea. Welcome to Basketball Hell, Part 1.
We look back on the glory days of the early 2000s Sacramento Kings and their eventual downfall.
Later, we run through depressing statistics and the even more depressing memories that define the first half of the Kings' NBA record 16-year playoff drought.
Finally, this is just part 1 of a 2-part podcast. Tune in next week to hear part 2.
It's all coming up. But first, here's the Solons.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, basketball season is upon us, not at this present moment as we were recording it before the basketball season, but when listeners hear this episode, it will have just kicked off, and it's a wonderful time of year. It's our favorite sport, ain't it, brother?
Absolutely. The leaves are changing. There's a slight chill to the air, and basketball has commenced.
And we felt it was the ripe time for a podcast that we've been thinking about since we first started the Flynn Brothers podcast 40-some-odd episodes ago. We always wanted to do a podcast about the Sacramento Kings, our favorite basketball team, and not just them, but their NBA record 16-year playoff drought. We kind of want to share stories, memories, crazy statistics from that over decade and a half worth of time. When you just hear me say the word 16-year playoff drought, Sacramento Kings, what sort of physical, mental effect does it have on you?
All those wasted hours I have spent watching terrible, terrible basketball. 16 years is such a long time.
Yeah, it is. It's, several presidents. When the Kings playoff drought started, it was 2007. The iPhone had not been invented, and all these crazy statistics. Miley Cyrus was still Hannah Montana, all these crazy statistics.
Basically, all of our formative years were spent rooting for a terrible basketball team.
Well, let's not plunge the listeners too deep into secondhand depression quite yet. We'll have plenty of time for that throughout this episode. The one thing I will mention, though, is it's so funny when you tell people, particularly in Los Angeles, that you're a Sacramento Kings fan, because so many people in Los Angeles have not even heard of the Sacramento Kings. They think you're talking about the Los Angeles Kings, the hockey team, or they just really have no clue what you're talking about. We'll get to this in a bit. But the Kings and Lakers had one of the most storied rivalries in our early childhood and one of the most storied rivalries in basketball in the early part of this century. And, yeah, it is just so funny being down here, and everyone is so laser-focused. Dodgers, Lakers, and every other part of the sports world just falls by the wayside.
Yeah, nobody cares. And being a Sacramento Kings fan, you're like, grr, Lakers, you're our rival. And the Lakers could not care less about it.
You're the Celtics? No, the Celtics. That's who our rival is.
Yeah. You're talking about something, 20 years ago?
Yeah, come on. Really quick, I want to do a brief history, if you will. This will be Jim's brief history of the Kings and their move to Sacramento. So before the Kings came to Sacramento, and before they were called the Sacramento Kings, they were the Rochester Royals there in New York. And then they moved to Cincinnati, where they were the Cincinnati Royals. Then they moved to Kansas City, where they were the Kansas City Kings. The color scheme in those days was kind of red, white, and blue. We had kind of either a royal blue or a navy blue. And the Kings now will sometimes do a throwback to that. But yeah, it is so funny that, that was their colors for so long. Now we associate the Kings with the regal color of purple. But yeah, it's so funny that they had the red, white, and blue for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the default stock colors of any American professional sports teams, and purple really didn't exist outside of the Lakers, I suppose, in the NBA. So it was, the territory to be trod upon, but there is definitely a classic look to those old jerseys.
But 40 years ago, in 1985, the Kings come to Sacramento, where they have remained ever since. The first 13 years of the team were absolutely terrible. The team always sucked. They never really had any good draft picks, and when they would get a good draft pick, they draft a bust, which we'll recognize that pattern later on here. The only bright spot really was a player we were vaguely aware of as we grew up, but Mitch Richmond, nicknamed The Rock, a very sturdy, stout shooting guard, one of the best non-Michael Jordan shooting guards of the 90s. Great three-point shooter, great defender, probably the most famous King in Sacramento before this era we're about to talk about. What did you say?
Yeah, kind of a classic good stats, bad team player.
Yes.
Not really capable of elevating everybody else around him, but it put in the right environment, he could really light it up. And I think another thing that bears mentioning is the Kings are the one and only professional sports franchise to ever be in Sacramento. So despite how bad the team was, they were still immediately embraced by the community.
Yes, and have never been abandoned despite the low depths they have sunk to. But before those low depths, let's discuss the glory years. The glory years for the Sacramento Kings begin in 1998. A lot of this was thanks to our general manager at the time, Jeff Petrie. Jeff Petrie was a great former basketball player. He was a two-time All-Star with the Trail Blazers, and unfortunately his career was cut short by a knee injury. I think he only played like 6 or 7 seasons. So sad that in those days you would just get one injury and then be gone for your whole career, whereas now you can have just catastrophic torn ACL, torn MCL, all these things, and then be back within 1 year.
Yeah, he was kind of an anomaly, too, which he was sort of a high-flying white, which was not typical of the era. And
or even this era.
or any era. So the knee injury is especially cruel for a player who was predicated his game much on athleticism.
So Jeff Petrie, he had been our general manager since I think about 94, 95, and then in 98, he trades Mitch Richmond for disgruntled star Chris Webber, who to this day is probably the biggest star in the history of the Sacramento era. Before with previous versions of the Kings, there was Oscar Robertson and there were some really big names, but Chris Webber in terms of the Sacramento era, definitely the biggest star. Talk to me a little bit about Chris Webber, sort of his background, because he was a player with such high potential, but had kind of suffered these tragedies and he was very disgruntled, and sort of what were some of the factors that led to that?
So probably the first mobile ball handling power forward that anybody had ever seen. The athleticism, the hands, the touch, just off the charts prospect. Goes to Michigan, part of the Fab Five, and sadly calls a timeout during a championship game when there were no timeouts. This leads to a technical foul. This much hyped team loses, and many people place the blame upon Chris Webber, which sort of leads to him leaving the school perhaps earlier than he should have. He is drafted by the Golden State Warriors. He has a opt-out after 1 year in his contract, and he doesn't like being played at center by the coach Don Nelson, and so he opts out of his contract after 1 year, despite Nelson playing him in the sort of precursor to modern basketball small ball center role. He then goes to the then Washington Bullets, now Wizards, where he spends a few years kind of in the wasteland, not really playing for any sort of meaningful basketball, known for having a really bad attitude. And eventually the Wizards, they want to get rid of him, and the Kings step up to the plate, ready to make an offer. And Webber basically says, I'm going to force my way to the Lakers. There's no way I am going to the Sacramento Kings, the lowly, terrible Sacramento Kings, out in a cow town of Sacramento. Sacramento now, very nice place to live, bit more developed. At the time when Webber was first coming to the team, it was not a particularly desirable metropolitan area.
No, it did feel more like a small town. The population's grown so much. The downtown's grown so much in the last 10 years or so. But yeah, Webber and any star really who comes to Sacramento from another team, it's usually when they're at a crossroads or a low point in their career. That's how it's kind of small market teams like Sacramento are able to get big stars like Chris Webber. But at the same time, the Kings drafted Jason Williams, who many people know by the nickname White Chocolate. He was an incredible passer, incredible ball handler, beyond flashy. If you're on the internet and into basketball, you've undoubtedly seen highlight reels of Jason Williams. He's known for doing a fake backwards pass that he puts behind his back and then elbows the opposite way, and he just has these incredible highlight plays. And Jason Williams' famous story about him is when he was a kid, especially in high school, there would be times where he would go to the gym 2-3 hours and he wouldn't even take a shot. He would literally just be dribbling, working on his ball handling, practicing passing. What an incredible player. How was it for you growing up watching Jason Williams?
What the sun is to Superman, Jason Williams was to a 5-year-old John Flynn. He was everything. I shaved my head to be like him. I tried to play like him. I tried to learn all of the dribble moves, the passing moves. I think one thing about that Kings team, the early Kings team, is they really celebrated passing. Chris Webber was a great passer. Jason Williams was a great passer. And these guys would feed each other. There was never a player who loved to feed Chris Webber buckets more than Jason Williams, who, for a guy as sort of flashy as he was, really valued kind of the team element of basketball as well.
Fleshing out the rest of the team, we got in 1998 Peja Stojakovic. We had drafted him in 96, but he finally came over here from Europe in 1998. 6'10", sharpshooter. Kind of a player who was incredible in his day, but gosh, would he be incredible in today's modern NBA with the floor spread, and his height could be such an advantage.
Yes, really big. Really released his shot high up to, won the 3-point contest multiple times. Great name, just rolls off the tongue. Peja Stojakovic. And would be devastating today. Everybody would want him.
From the Lakers, we also saw, not from the Lakers at the time, but we did sign Vlade Divac, who used to play for the Lakers. He was kind of our glue guy veteran who, had played with Magic Johnson and had sort of an up and down career. I believe he was traded in the trade that brought Kobe Bryant's draft rights.
That's right.
To the Lakers from the Hornets. And so Vlade was kind of on the back nine of his career, but there was such this confluence of talent in 1998 that the Kings immediately became just a very good team, and it was all under the tutelage of our new coach, Rick Adelman, who instilled with his assistant coach the Princeton offense, which, as you said, focused on lots of ball movement, lots of player movement off the ball, and just a really, really exciting brand of offensive basketball. The Kings famously had a cover on Sports Illustrated. The title of the cover was The Greatest Show on the Court. And the arena that they played in was Arco Arena out there in Natomas in the suburbs of Sacramento. It was known as the loudest arena in the NBA, and it was such a special time to be a Kings fan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think this, too, was what won Chris Webber over, was that we put a team around him that really wanted to celebrate him. You had a guy who's willing to bring the ball up the floor. You have a big man who's going to be passing it to him as well. There's this really unique chemistry that forms with the team, in addition to being worshipped almost like a college town feel by the fans. So whatever misgivings Webber had originally about playing in Sacramento are soon dispelled as the team around him really congeals into something special and is supported full-throatedly by the fans.
So this team's first year together was a lockout year. It was 1998 to 1999. They were a few games over to 500, got to the playoffs, but they lost in the first round to the Stockton and Malone Utah Jazz. The next year, 1999 to 2000, was another winning year. Again, the Princeton offense under Adelman, they were really gelling together, really developing chemistry, and they got to the playoffs and were eventually in the first round eliminated by the Shaq Kobe Lakers, who would go on to win their first NBA title. And then in 2000 to 2001, the following season, the Kings traded for our current coach now, and at the time, a lockdown defender in Doug Christie. What type of player was Doug Christie?
The type of player any team would want. Yeah. Hard-nosed defender, completely selfless, willing to do whatever it takes for the team to win. Gave the team a bit of grit, a bit of nasty. The other four players that we've mentioned are not renowned as defenders, and you really need one top defender, particularly on the wing, if you have any prayer of competition in the NBA. So Doug, I think, was sort of the final piece that fit this five-man starting lineup really into place.
In 2001, the Kings are starting to find a groove. They make the playoffs again. They win in the first round against the Suns, but yet again, they are eliminated by the Shaq Kobe Lakers. This time in the second round, of course, those Lakers go on to win their second straight NBA championship. Then, the greatest season in franchise history, 2001 to 2002. It begins with us trading fan favorite Jason Williams for the clutch point guard from the Vancouver Grizzlies, Mike Bibby. How did you remember feeling when the team traded away your absolute favorite player?
Devastated. could not understand why. And I remember our parents, my dad, trying to explain it to me, because Jason Williams was a bit of a hot dog, a bit of a player who would take the ill-advised shot at the wrong time. Nowadays, it's very common to see a point guard just walk up the floor and jack a three-pointer. That's considered a good shot for some. Jason Williams would take that shot, and it was not a good shot for him.
Not a great shooter over the course of his career. Just not incredible passer, incredible facilitator, but not a great defender or shooter.
Yeah, and so those things really were a weak point of the team. He wasn't a guy maybe who was making sure that everybody was set up. So though he maybe had some higher highs, he had some lower lows than Mike Bibby, who once, you sort of saw him start getting his feet under him and taking control of this offense. The other thing that really was helpful about Bibby is that you need a guy who you can go to just get a shot up at the end of a game when you need a bucket. And Bibby was not afraid to take that shot, relished the opportunity to take that shot. And as aforementioned, Chris Webber did not love being the guy who had to take that shot. So bringing in Mike Bibby not only shores up the team, but also kind of plugs one of Chris Webber's weaknesses, which makes him even more happy to be a King.
In that offseason, too, Chris Webber, who, again, said he would force his way to the Lakers, ends up re-signing and committing to the Sacramento Kings. I remember our dad took us to, there was a Chris Webber re-signed with the Kings party at the old downtown Plaza Mall, which has since been torn down and is now where the new arena stands today. But I remember we had a T-shirt from that day. We've had it for probably 20 years. I think we maybe still have it somewhere. And it was such a special moment because not only, it's one thing as a small market team to get a big player, basically to finagle him over to your team with a trade, but to get them to commit, to get them to re-sign, it signaled a shift in the history of the Sacramento Kings, didn't it?
In the history of Sacramento.
Yeah.
That somebody who, Chris Webber dated Tyra Banks. He released a rap album. He starred in movies. And he wants to live in Sacramento. That's, I think, a huge moment for us. I think it validated the franchise, but also validated the city and sort of changed the way that, people thought about Sacramento, that a guy as big as Chris Webber was willing to stick around.
The Kings led the NBA that season with 61 wins. In the first round, they beat the Stockton and Malone Jazz. Then in the second round, they beat the Dirk Nowitzki Mavericks. And then came one of the most infamous playoff series in the history of the National Basketball Association, the 2002 Western Conference Finals. It was the Sacramento Kings against, you guessed it, the Shaq-Kobe Lakers. The Shaq-Kobe Lakers were going for a three-peat. As I had said, they had won 2 straight titles before. There was a lot of bad blood between the Kings and Lakers, not only during this series, but kind of leading up to it. There are a lot of barbs exchanged between both teams, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, Shaq and Kobe are 2 of the, 12 best players to ever play, and there was this pretentiousness about how great that they were. It's like, how dare you even think that you can compete with us? We are one of the all-time great teams. We are coached by Phil Jackson, who just led Michael Jordan to 6 titles. We are excellent. We live in Los Angeles. We are one of the most storied franchises of all time, and this is just another chapter. And how dare you think that you're going to get your name in this book?
Phil Jackson called Sacramento a cow town. In response, the Kings fans brought cowbells to Arco Arena, so the Lakers were just absolutely deafened as they played, and Phil Jackson could not even hear himself think during a timeout. And Shaq also, known for being someone who would throw a lot of barbs out in the media, do a lot of battle raps. He called us the Sacramento Queens. And we had a good friend, family friend from Los Angeles who was a Lakers fan, and he wrote our dad an email, I remember, during this time, where he wrote kind of a parody to We Three Kings, that well-known Christmas song, We Three Kings of Orient. And he changed the words, though, to We the Kings, that he was singing about the Kings. And one of the lines in the song I remember is, we the Kings of Sacto are not going to beat the Lakers at squat. Then other lines went, Kobe, D-Fish, Ori, swish, swish. He's referencing how the Lakers are just a way better team. This was the sort of stuff that was happening at the time. It was very fun. It was very jovial. There was a little bit of nastiness to it. But it's why you love being a fan. It's why you root for a team and stick by a team, is moments like that where you can have those sort of frenemy battles with rival teams and rival fans, right?
It's what makes a great rivalry, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about like the New York Knicks and Indiana Pacers. This was basically California's version of that. Sacramento's thought of as sort of the Midwest of California. You can't find a much more glitzy city than Los Angeles and much more of a glitzy team than those Shaq Kobe Lakers. So there was just contrasts all over the place. You know, those were two individually brilliant players who had some role players who were supporting them, but really it was about Shaq and Kobe doing their thing, whereas the Kings were much more of an egalitarian, everybody eats, we're all together. Vladdy's throwing his arm around guys and hugging them and giving them kisses on the cheek because he's a Serbian, and, you know, Shaq and Kobe are bickering and fighting about who gets more credit. So it felt like if this was a sports movie, the Kings would have won. But this was not a sports movie.
As we've referenced on our another Versus pod, there's that NorCal, SoCal thing, that inherent rivalry based on geography. The Kings heading into Game 4, we're up 2-1, and we're looking to go up 3-1 and really seal the series. However, in Game 4, there is a missed layup by Shaquille O'Neal as time is expiring. Instead of grabbing the rebound, Vlade Divac bats it out into space toward the three-point line, right into the hands of Robert Horry, Big Shot Bob, as he is known, who fires up a three-pointer. As time expires, it goes in, and the Lakers win in buzzer-beater fashion, Game 4, tying the series up at 2-2. The most devastating sports moment of your life?
I cried. I am still sad when you just bringing it up, reliving it. Every now and again, it just shows up because it's one of the iconic moments of the early 2000s NBA. It'll just replay randomly if you watch the NBA, and it's devastating every time.
My heart sinks every time I see it.
Every time I see the ball bouncing, I'm like, well, he's not going to make it. He won't make it this time. It's one of those things where, like, it's such a traumatic memory that when you see it happening in replay, you think that maybe it'll happen differently. Maybe it won't happen the way that it did. But it does. And this completely changes the feel of this series because the Kings, you know, is going to be an uphill battle to beat the Lakers anyway. And when you're in these series where it's an uphill battle, momentum is everything, and you really can't afford to lose a game that you should win.
Yeah.
And that's what happens here.
In Game 5, the Kings and Mike Bibby get their revenge. Bibby hits a clutch shot coming off a Chris Webber screen, and the Kings win and are up 3-2.
The greatest moment in franchise history, the highest high.
Absolutely. Game 6, perhaps the lowest low. The Kings are set back by a Kobe Bryant elbow straight into Mike Bibby's face that is not called as a foul. It draws blood. And the awful officiating also in Game 6. The Lakers shoot 27 free throws in the fourth quarter, an absolutely staggering figure to this day. Was it rigged? It's hard to know. Tim Donaghy, who ref the game, was eventually indicted for fixing games in the NBA and profiting off of it. This was one of the games that was not necessarily he was found guilty of, but many claim, even Kobe Bryant himself, the late Kobe Bryant, did not dispute the fact when pressed in an interview that it was rigged. And so the Lakers tie it up 3-3, but the Kings have it Game 7 in Sacramento. And the Lakers win it in overtime in Sacramento in Game 7. The Kings choked. They shot 16 of 30 from the free throw line and were completely limp in overtime.
Yeah,
and,
multiple badly missed threes, just playing scared, not confident that they can beat the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. And you talk about it being rigged. A little bit of context around that. At the time, there is a commissioner, David Stern, who's basically behind Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, the person responsible for creating the modern NBA. And there was always a suspicion surrounding Stern that he would steer things one way or another, or like a mob boss, he didn't need to say it for you to know what he would want. And if the Kings had won this series, instead of the Lakers going for a historic three-peat, 3 championships in a row, it would have been the small market Sacramento Kings against the small market New Jersey Nets in the NBA Finals, which would have proven kryptonite to the TV ratings at a time when the NBA is just kind of pulling itself out of the post-Jordan years here. Yeah. So that was the sort of justification for why people thought it was rigged.
The Lakers go on, as you said, to beat the New Jersey Nets and secure their three-peat. It Still, though, to this day, between the Kings and Lakers in that 0-2 Western Conference Finals, one of the most iconic playoff series in the history of the NBA, especially for a non-finals matchup. The next year, 0-2-0-3, the Kings, again, are probably the best team in the NBA, but unfortunately, in the playoffs, Chris Webber blows out his knee, and the Kings are eliminated by the Mavericks, a team we probably would have beaten had Chris Webber stayed healthy. The Lakers were kind of falling apart at the seams that year, probably in addition to 0-2, our best chance at the title. The image of Chris Webber on the golf cart after his basically career-altering knee injury with Gerald Wallace's arm around him and Chris Webber, the towel hanging over his head, very devastating sports injury image, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, again, not to keep bringing Superman into the equation, but it was when you were a kid, you don't really think that the stars that you root for can actually be damaged, can actually be hurt. And, Chris Webber was somebody who my brother and I played basketball at a local community center in Oak Park in Sacramento, and he one time just stopped by on a random Friday night, shook hands, greeting the people. Giant hands, biggest hands I've ever shook of any man, even though I was a small boy, and so comparison-wise was probably crazy. But he was just sitting in the stands, literally stands. There were probably 6-7 rows, not very big at all. No really security around him or anything, and just really embraced the community.
Yeah.
And to see him go down like that is tough too, because you would say, oh, well, there's going to be next year. Yeah, he's hurt right now, but he'll come back and he'll be just the same. He'll be the same guy. And, that was kind of the first time that I realized that actually you can have an injury that changes everything. And, he was never really the same player after that, just sort of lost that explosive burst for a man his size that made him so special.
Next year, 0-3-0-4, Kings are still good, but they're aging, and they are eventually eliminated by Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves. You talk about this series going 7 games, I see in the notes here. Do you remember some of these moments?
I do. So it goes 7 games. So in retrospect, I don't remember it being this close, but it was 7 games, goes down to the final seconds. The Kings are down 3. Chris Webber springs open to the 3-point line. The ball flies across the court right into his hands. KG is not expecting Webber to get it. Webber pump fakes. KG goes sailing by. Nobody is in between Chris Webber and a wide-open 3-point shot. Not his shot, typically, but one you have to take under the circumstances. Wide open. He shoots it. It traces a perfect arc through the air and hits every part of the rim and pops out. And this was another moment like the Ori shot where I remember rewatching it over and over again and being in disbelief that it had happened. And again, this was Chris Webber, the icon of the team, who just sadly comes up short. And it's another moment, in his kind of cursed career that the ball just doesn't bounce his way in the final moments of a huge game. And it's just pretty sad, but it is very emblematic of what that Kings team was. Just so close right there, but just couldn't get that final moment when it counted most.
Next season, 04-05, Webber is traded. Doug Christie is traded. Vlade goes back and signs with the Lakers, and the Kings lose in the first round. The year after, 05-06, Peja Stojakovic is traded for Ron Artest, and we lose in the first round. At this point now, the whole team is gone except for Mike Bibby, who is only going to last another year or two. And the glory years have basically officially ended, and the, I guess we'll call them shit years, have officially begun. And we'll tell you all about these shit years and our 16-year playoff drought when we come back from the break. All right, the shit years. Let's do it. 2006 to 2007, the Kings' record is 33-49. First time we have been under 500 in 8 years or so. Rick Adelman, his contract is not renewed, and it begins a carousel of coaches who try to replace him. We always referred to this and the subsequent non-playoff years as the Adelman curse.
Yes.
Would you say this was sort of the original sin of the playoff drought, is not renewing great coach Rick Adelman's contract?
I think we did him dirty. I think you could also say that his style of play had become a bit antiquated as the modern NBA had happened. And I think, too, the Kings were also just full of hubris. It had become so easy, so expected that over 500 seasons and going to the playoffs. That was the norm. And it was seen that 33-49, well, that is just unacceptable.
Right.
We can't. This is not who our franchise is at all. We need to get rid of them. We need to get some new blood and get the team back to where it's supposed to be. And we gravely miscalculated how easy that would be.
Yes, and we gravely miscalculated by hiring our new coach, Eric Musselman, who, before he had coached his first game with the Sacramento Kings, was arrested for a DUI, and he is now a college coach. He's been pretty successful with Arkansas, and then now he's with USC. And but since he coached for the Kings, he has not coached in the NBA since. Our draft pick that year was Quincy Douby out of Rutgers. We picked him 19th. He spent 2.5 seasons with the Kings, then had 7 games after that with Toronto, and then was out of the NBA forever. He never averaged more than 4.8 points in a season. Not to crap all over Quincy Douby, but there's a lot of bad draft picks the Kings made, and it's just to illustrate the point that we had a lot of bad luck and a lot of bad choices during this 16-year playoff drought.
Yeah.
And one of those bad choices was signing John Salmons, a player who I really despised. Again, I don't actually despise the man John Salmons, but I despise, in a sort of a sports hate kind of way, John Salmons. I despise him so much I would always call him John Salmons, because it's spelled the exact same as salmon.
What would you say drew your ire with John Salmons?
Well, we had him not just one stint on our team, but 2 stints, which we'll get to later. And he was just a very uninspiring body language player. Like, he always looked very bored. He always looked disengaged. He was never very motivated. He wasn't really a rah, let's go win this game type of guy. He just seemed content with mediocrity.
Yeah.
And I was a fan who, despite rooting for a mediocre team, was not content with mediocrity. So I resented Salmons for that.
Yes.
I dare say.
It was the type of guy who just wouldn't have been allowed on the teams of the glory years. And there's a steady degradation of the standard of quality of player that is allowed to put on the Sacramento Kings purple as we go along here.
The next year, 07-08, the Kings are 33-44. We somehow improved our record. A new coach, Reggie Theus. He was a former Kings guard in the 80s who was pretty good, but again, kind of a good stats, bad team guy.
More known as being sort of a dashingly good-looking Jerry curl mullet sort of guy, Reggie Theus. Sort of a 80s stash,
We
short shorts.
Yeah, oh, I'm getting a little hot under the collar here in that description. Our pick that year at number 10 was Spencer Hawes out of Washington. He was our first lottery pick since Jason White Chocolate Williams in 1998. Hawes, okay career, journeyman center, not really someone you could build a team around or even have as a main part of a good team. As you mentioned, at this point, sort of the culture is dissipating. The team is getting content with mediocrity. We have this bad balance of either really, really old veteran players or really, really young, unproven, unpolished players. And, we'll get to it at the end of part 2, the art of terrible basketball. But this is part of it in terms of roster construction. The Kings just were not doing well at this time. And Jeff Petrie, who had so many good years as a general manager, was really sort of loose in his touch, wasn't he?
Yeah, grasping at straws. But I think, too, the thing that made the Glory Years team work was Weber was the linchpin around which everything rotated. Right. And without that top player, that top talent, you're just going to be struggling to find somebody who can work. And this is a period of transition. So what builds culture in a team is consistency and, standards and a way that we do things here. And that had not really been reestablished.
The next year, 08-09, we win 17 games and lose 65. Sickening to look at those two numbers. That's winning barely over 20% of your games. That is the worst win percentage in Kings franchise history. That year, we drafted Jason Thompson out of Rider. He was a power forward. He still holds the record for the most games played in the Sacramento era at 541. His career averages were 9 points and 7 rebounds a game, and he was our starting power forward the vast majority of that time. Again, like the Salmons thing, he was just a mediocre player. He had a little running hook shot that he would do, but he was a dud on defense. He was a dud as a playmaker. He was a dud in terms of leadership. And it just drove me crazy that our team kept him for so long. And in these subsequent years, we're going to talk about all the power forwards we brought in to try to replace him. And yet he just still held on. He still was king of the hill of that starting power forward spot for all those years.
A stiff, a dud who wore cement shoes. I mean,
bad hands.
I can't believe how many years of basketball I've watched Jason Thompson play. Also a type of player that does not really exist anymore. A non-shooting, rebounding specialist 4. Probably about 6'10", couldn't really handle the ball, couldn't really pass, couldn't switch on defense, would not give you anything. And once he finally was jettisoned from our organization, he would never play meaningful NBA basketball.
A cup of coffee with the Warriors and then gone
into
out
the
of
wind.
the league, into the wind. But Reggie Theus, after 24 games, was fired as our head coach because he went 6-18. His assistant coach Chuck Person, former player, was also fired, and his coach was replaced by Kenny Nat. I wrote down here he's also known by his nickname Who. Kenny Nat goes 11-47 the rest of the season. He never coached in the NBA again. So we have all these guys who we're hiring as coaches who, hindsight's 2020, but every coach we've hired so far since Adelman never coached in the NBA again. I mean, you couldn't have this kind of bad luck in a million lifetimes.
Yeah, and the theory behind it is, we found here a diamond in the rough. This is somebody who we're going to bring in here, and this is where they prove themselves, and that just did not happen.
Our best player during this era is Kevin Martin, who had a very funky, low kind of shot. Pretty good journeyman career. He probably his best years were with us. He battled some injuries, but a very, very good shooting guard.
Yeah, famously was the return for James Harden when he was traded to the Houston Rockets, a guy who was not a defender or a passer at all. Kind of the last holdover of the very last wisps of the Kings' glory years as we were sort of transitioning. A man who deserves some mention is Brad Miller here, who was an all-star big who sort of helped prop up the team in those sort of post-glory years.
And even Ron Artest deserves a little credit. He played, post Malice in the Palace, played very well with the Kings. Kevin Martin had a couple playoff moments. Bibby was holding on. Bonzi Wells. There were a couple names of guys during that transition period who, we got to tip our caps to.
But you start going from Chris Webber, all-time talent to, now you're Brad Miller. It's like, all right, he's still pretty good. He's still an all-star. And then you're at Kevin Martin, and you're like, oh, boy, this is...
And pretty soon it's Jason Thompson and John Salmons. Speaking of Salmons, we traded him that season, so that was pretty awesome. But he would be back, so it wasn't a total win. Next year, 2009 to 2010, the Kings go 25-57. That year, we drafted Tyreke Evans out of Memphis, 4th overall. He immediately becomes our best player. We gave him, the keys to the car of the organization. Evans, during his rookie year, only one of 5 rookies to average 25-5. Did you look at the notes? Can you name the other ones off the top of your head?
Jordan, LeBron, Oscar Robertson. I think those were the ones who had done it at the time.
And one has done it since.
Luka Doncic,
there you
I
go.
believe. Yeah.
Did you peek at the notes, or did you know
I may have seen it before, but those are some of the all-time best players, to ever play the game. So we're like, we've found a diamond in the rough here, but I think in retrospect, the team was geared much more towards making sure that Evans hit those marks than winning.
Evans won Rookie of the Year. Who did he win it over, and who did we draft Tyreke Evans over?
Steph Curry.
Steph Curry, yeah, that's right. Steph Curry's won 4 titles, unanimous MVP, won it back-to-back, right?
One of the all-time cornerstone players you would want for a franchise. Good guy, selfless superstar, everything you want in an NBA player. The thing about Evans, though, to give him his credit, he was unreal going to the basket and was left-handed, which really took a lot of guys by surprise, and he was very, very strong.
He was left-handed?
I believe so.
I don't think he was left-handed. Double-check that, Will. I think he was somewhat ambidextrous, but I do not think he was left-handed.
Boy.
Yeah, it's Tyreek. Look up Tyreek Evans left-handed. In the meantime, we also drafted Omri Caspi that year, who was the first Israeli NBA player. And the fact has come in, John was wrong. He was not left-handed. Absolutely incorrect.
Oh, God.
It's just a cocktail of misinformation.
I remember
in that
him going
years.
left a lot. That's,
yeah. Well, he's, like I said, he's a good
He's
player.
ambidextrous.
Oh, people thought, he appeared to be ambidextrous. Certainly the gullible, we'll say. This was the lone season. We had a backup forward named John Brockman, who had one of my favorite nicknames of all time. Jerry Reynolds, our color commentator, called him the Brockness Monster. One of the best NBA nicknames of all time, up there with Magic and Shaq.
Yeah, absolutely. Brockman just really defined the way this guy played. Gritty, tough-nosed, not an exceptional player, but there would be a lot of guys like this who didn't really have NBA level talent, but because they wanted it and they gave a damn, the fans would gravitate around them. And this was buried a bit in the fact getting confirmed, but Omri Caspi, one of the few lovable Kings of the era, and a true good guy, would have belonged on the glory year Kings.
Couple stints with the Kings as well. Our coach that year was Paul Westphal, who was known for coaching the Phoenix Suns when Charles Barkley and that team were led to the NBA Finals. He himself had won a championship. He was a 5-time All-Star with the Celtics as a player, played on the Suns as well in the late 70s. And, Paul Westphal, he was a really well-regarded coach. He maybe was a little old by the time we got him. It's just kind of sad it never worked out, because when we hired him, it was actually like, hey, we got an adult in the room and this could actually work out. But, yeah, just kind of sad it never worked out with him.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a coach can only be as good as the players that he has in front of him. And despite a promising rookie season, Tyreek Evans would not prove to be the type of guy you can really build a team around.
The big-time storm cloud, though, hanging over the Sacramento Kings organization at this time in particularly, wisps of it during the glory years, but especially now is our ownership group. They are owned by the Maloofs. Gavin and Joe, were those the Maloof brothers? And they had a sister. I think they own the Palms Casino in Las Vegas. And they were just either unable or unwilling to spend money on the team. So we continued to roster these guys like Jason Thompson and Salmons and Francisco Garcia, who, average players who just continue to play huge minutes for us. And another player we brought in to try to steal some of Thompson's minutes was Carl Landry. Again, another player who had 2 stints with the Kings, but Thompson, he was king of the hill. He would not be beat out for that starting spot.
He would get nervous in training camp and sort of tighten up his act and play a little bit better, just better enough than whoever we would bring in to beat him. Right. And then once he had secured the starting job, it was right back to the old garbage that we were well acquainted with. And the Maloofs are sort of the last vestige of the cheapo fly-by-night owners of the earlier part of the league. Now you pretty much have to be a billionaire to own a team. And the Maloofs, maybe they had $1 billion, maybe they had $2 billion, but they treated the team not like a glorified, expensive hobby, which is the way that you should view your professional basketball team. You should be running it at a loss because you can always sell it for much more than you purchased it for. Right. But the Maloofs were trying to turn a profit with the Kings, which is crazy because they owned a casino, which should just be a profit machine that they could feed into the team. But they were much more wrapped up in their own self-image as opposed to making the team good. Also, they bought the team right during the beginning of the glory years, so they had a warped idea of how easy it was to field a competitive basketball team. However, one thing you have to say in credit of the Maloofs is when they were good, the Maloofs would be courtside and trashily cheering the team on, high-fiving people.
That was that era too of the untucked, flashy dress shirt
with
too many
jeans
buttons.
that are big.
They were the kings of that era.
Yeah, so good riddance to the Maloofs, and God bless them wherever they are. Who knows what they're doing?
Who knows? Somewhere in Vegas, huh? Sin City.
Undoubtedly.
All right, quick break. We'll be right back.
Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man. Hey, 'cause I got a girl, and she got a man.
right, next season, 2010 to 2011, the Kings go 24-58. This was the year we drafted DeMarcus Cousins, 5th overall out of Kentucky. Can you just very briefly give us a little summation of DeMarcus Cousins to those who are uninitiated?
One of the all-time great center talents, immensely skilled, absolutely incapable of controlling his emotions.
Mercurial, you might say.
Was a word used no less than 60,000 times when
during his tenure with the Kings. He clashed a lot with old school coach, taskmaster Paul Westphal. At the time, our starting center was Samuel Dalembert, who played some with Allen Iverson, and Cousins basically immediately came in and replaced him. Dalembert at that point of his career was just too slow and lumbering to play with Tyreke Evans, who played really fast-paced. So Cousins immediately kind of got into the starting lineup, and yes, he was immature, but we thought, well, he's 19 years old. He only played 1 year of college ball. He'll get older. He'll get better, and at times it happened, but for the most part, he stayed pretty mercurial his whole time there.
Yes, but was just capable of handling the ball at a time when big men did not do this, and had a face-up game to the basket, and would just blow by guys, spin moves, power moves. He was so fast yet so powerful that you were just totally seduced by the potential.
That year, we also drafted Hassan Whiteside, 33rd overall. He never played in Sacramento. He eventually went to Miami, got in great shape, had a couple good double-double seasons with Miami, got this huge overpay contract. Miami basically immediately got rid of him. He kind of bounced around the league. About a decade later, he rejoined the Kings, saying in a statement that he had unfinished business with the Kings, and that unfinished business was continuing to be terrible, which he succeeded in.
Unfinished business in that he still needed to be paid the rest of his contract.
Right. That year, we acquired fan favorite Marcus Thornton halfway through the season. We traded Carl Landry for him. So Jason Thompson, he already secured the starting job, but he could breathe a little sigh of relief. Marcus Thornton, though, he was a fan favorite. We came in the last 27 games of the season, averaged 21 points. He really had a knack for clutch shots. He was inconsistent, not great on D, but in terms of absolute heat check flamethrower guys with a hell of a three-pointer, hell of a jump shot. He was really one of the best, and he had a lot of memorable big games during the playoff drought era in Sacramento.
Yeah, sort of an undersized shooting guard with a lightning quick release, and really would jump up high on his jumpers. So it was this very striking image that he painted. And again, the fans were desperate for anyone who could put the ball in the basket, and he could do that, though he probably gave back just as many points on the other end.
This season, the day was December 29th, 2010. Tyreke Evans hits one of the greatest game-winning shots in Sacramento Kings, if not league history. Basically, what happened is O.J. Mayo of the Memphis Grizzlies hit an incredible fadeaway jumper from the foul line and put the Grizzlies ahead. DeMarcus Cousins is taking out the ball. There's only about 1 or 2 seconds left. The reporter is coming onto the floor to interview O.J. Mayo because she believes he's just hit the game-winning shot. Cousins throws it into Evans. Evans catches it about the opposite three-point line, takes a dribble or two, gets a few feet in front of the half-court line, and in midair is contested, has to basically double pump and heaves a half-court shot that swishes through the basket. It is an incredible, incredible game winner. I get absolute tingles like all over my body, like I'm plugged into a light socket when I watch the replay of it. I remember when it happened, it was such an incredible, breathless moment. It was just, to this day, I think is one of the most improbable, incredible shots I've seen in my entire life.
Made me deliriously happy. Makes me deliriously happy anytime I rewatch it. Grant Napier, the play-by-play announcer, has a phenomenal call of the event.
To replay it, I believe he, as Evans is shooting, says, "Evans at the horn," and then the ball goes in, and Grant screams, "Yes! Oh my goodness!" And it literally is just, and he lets the sound of the crowd go over it, but it was like he screamed. He literally just was so shocked by
you
it.
can almost hear Grant taking the headset off in disgust. That's how over the game is.
And then he
other really a great moment from this is Dante Green, a guy who lived at the end of the Kings bench during these bad years. as Evans has shot the ball, Dante Green is galloping onto the court almost as Evans has just released it from his hand. Dante Green somehow knows this ball is going in.
He gets off the bench. He's galloping toward the hoop, and then bang, ball goes in. Dante's one of the first to embrace him. It really was an incredible moment.
There were a few of these moments. The Kings are so bad that they often find themselves in close games, like a disproportionate number of close games. And so there would be a lot of like nail-biting, buzzer-beater wins that we would snatch from the jaws of defeat.
But many last-second heartbreaking losses. This year, the sadly name of Arco Arena is changed from Arco Arena to Power Balance Pavilion, one of the worst names ever in the history of sports for an arena. Do you remember Power Balance? For those who are too young or just weren't paying attention at the time, what was a Power Balance?
They were wristbands that were sold in malls, and as I recall, the sales pitch essentially was a salesperson would tell somebody, try to stand as strong as you possibly can, and then the salesperson would just shove this person over, and they'd be like, all right, now put on one of these Power Balance bands.
These magic bracelets.
And let's see if I can shove you over. And then obviously the person knows that they just got shoved over. They're embarrassed, so they sort of brace themselves a little more. The salesperson doesn't quite push as hard, and whoa, lo and behold, they can't be knocked over wearing the Power Balance bands. And these swept the NBA and many athletics. The total placebo effect.
Total placebo effect. The people who made it admitted it was bullshit. It was all over the NBA, all over sports. Every type of sport, people were wearing them. It was so ridiculous. It was so emblematic of how shabby the team was and how shabby the Maloofs were that they would have made this deal, sell out Arco Arena, one of the great arena names, and do it for some, crock of horse shit that was the Power Balance bracelet. At the end of this season, kind of toward the summer, there were these murmurs that the Maloofs wanted to move the Sacramento Kings to Anaheim. They basically had a handshake deal with Anaheim, as if they weren't hated enough. Here they are trying to rip the team away from Sacramento. And then billionaire Ron Burkle and Mayor Kevin Johnson, who was the mayor at the time, began fighting to keep the team in Sacramento. And before the season, it was basically announced that the Kings will be in Sacramento for one more year, but unsure after that, right? And so there was, for a few years, just this sense of, God, the team sucks and they break your heart, but I don't want to lose them. Like they're our crap team. Like, I don't want to lose them. Do you remember how just kind of tragic that was growing up, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was, again, it's one of the few defining features of Sacramento. It's what sets Sacramento apart from, a lot of relatively small cities. And at one time we remembered, it's like, look, this was the reason that Chris Webber was willing to live in Sacramento. And sure, we're in some down times now, but this is something that makes our city special. This is something that we can build back up again. And yet they're trying to take it away from us, which was it's a blow to the identity.
Next year, 2011-2012, the Kings go 22-44. We drafted college sensation Jimmer Fredette out of BYU, 10th overall. He never quite lives up to the hype. There's just sort of too much pressure on him. He was known in college for being an excellent three-point shooter, but he's very undersized. And, talk about what people saw when he was on defense.
Yeah, he was just a total target. Teams would set screens to make sure that Jimmer Fredette ended up guarding their best player, and that person would just torch him going to the basket. The Kings take the ball out of the net, and they inbound it to Jimmer, and he's getting pressure 94 feet up the court, and just kind of lacked that elite level athleticism that you need to play at the NBA level, but you can still sort of get away with not having in college. And he was known as a sharp shooter. And as a result, every time he shot a three, everyone expected every three to go in. And so it was just too much anticipation for every three, too much frustration and angst when he would miss, and I think this just kind of tainted his game. He would eventually end up in China, where he became a god in their professional basketball ranks, routinely scoring, I think, something like 50 to 60 points a game.
I guess what I was going for is when offensive players saw Jimmer was defending them, they saw
food,
like in
a cartoon steak.
In a cartoon, when you see a person as a giant turkey leg or a steaming turkey. That's what I was going for. Yeah. But anyway, we drafted Jimmer Fredette right before Klay Thompson and 5 picks before Kawhi Leonard. Boy, could have had Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. That would have been kind of nice, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the Warriors now, we think of them as being a very glitzy franchise. Right. They were akin to the Kings, yes. if not lower on the totem pole than the Kings at this time.
They themselves had one of the longest playoff droughts in NBA history.
There's no reason the Kings could not have been the Splash Brothers' home.
That's a shame. We also, though, picked another point guard in that draft. We drafted 5'9" Isaiah Thomas out of Washington. He was the last pick in the draft. He immediately became a fan favorite and a star on our team. Talk to me a little bit about Isaiah Thomas. Of course, not the Isaiah Thomas famous for the Detroit Pistons in the 80s and 90s, but our Isaiah Thomas.
Small, but with a ton of heart. Hit one of the great game-winning shots in the NCAA tournament, and was sort of somebody we took as a flyer. When you take someone 60th overall, there's not much hopes for them turning into a quality NBA player, but almost immediately, as soon as he got on the court, it was like, whoa, this guy's fast and super athlete. You know, you have to be a super athlete.
Hell of a shooter, too.
Yeah, undersized player, but he could really jump out of the gym. He could dunk. He would take guys by surprise, and just tough as nails. So kind of gave the team a much-needed kick of, let's win, guys. What if we tried to win
big time underdog his whole career. He had a great season. I believe 2017 with the Boston Celtics was an all-star, and just really an incredible career for someone who was such an underdog. We brought in another player to try and replace Jason Thompson. It was J.J. Hickson, who I actually thought would be kind of good. We got him from the Cleveland Cavaliers, and boy, that dog just wouldn't hunt.
Yeah,
and,
he was pretty good for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and as would just happen time and time again, the Kings would bring in somebody who had a pretty good season the year before, and then they get to the Kings and they would stink it up.
We also brought in Chuck Hayes, who was a, I'll say, out of shape / portly, undersized big man. He was a rebounder who couldn't rebound. He was a defender who couldn't defend. And I remember you mentioning this at the time, where he showed up to training camp and he had a heart abnormality, which, is not good. We felt very bad. But then he was, he couldn't probably work out very well. So he comes in out of shape, and he's just not a very good player. And then we started, for some reason that year, doing the C for captain on jerseys, and we gave Chuck Hayes the captaincy, even though he was our backup power forward and was just terrible. I remember that really pissed you off.
Yeah, it was awful. I remember at this time I had a friend who had tickets to see the Kings, and there was a very springy young center named JaVale McGee who Chuck Hayes was matched up against one time, and they just threw an easy alley-oop right over Chuck Hayes' head. JaVale McGee slammed it down, and I remember I heckled Chuck Hayes. I said, "Nice D, Chuck." And Chuck just sort of shook his head sadly. There was nothing he could do.
Needed a stepladder.
He was about a 6'6", not particularly mobile center. I believe he had made a reputation for himself as a shack stopper. He was
something like that.
Yeah, he was one of the guys who you would bring in to ice the other team's center because he was just so stout you couldn't back him down. That was the one thing Chuck Hayes had for him, that you couldn't back him down. But at the time, the game is sort of beginning its shift, kind of going more and more outwards, and so Chuck Hayes is a dinosaur in the age of mammals.
During all this dysfunction, DeMarcus Cousins is becoming increasingly erratic and at odds with Coach Paul Westphal. This is from ESPN. On January 1st, 2012, the new year, head coach Paul Westphal sent DeMarcus Cousins home from the Kings home game against the New Orleans Hornets, saying that Cousins was unwilling / unable to embrace traveling in the same directions as his team. It cannot be ignored indefinitely. Shortly thereafter, Cousins demanded a trade and then denied demanding a trade. 4 days later, Paul Westphal was fired and replaced with Keith Smart. Keith Smart, of course, best remembered for hitting the game-winning shot in the 1987 NCAA championship game that gave the Hoosiers a 74-73 victory over the Syracuse Orangemen. Smart had coached Golden State, I believe, the year before, replacing Don Nelson, who had sort of aged out. But yeah, boy, coach and player yell at each other. Player demands trade, says he doesn't demand trade, coach fired. That just sort of sums up how the Kings were operating at that point. Oh, and by the way, the team might move.
Yeah, and, it doesn't take a genius to read between the tea leaves of, DeMarcus, what if instead of trading you, we fire the coach? Is the obvious
Will that
thing
make you
the
happy?
owner said. Yeah, Keith Smart, too, this was the sort of beginning of a period where the Kings, as the Warriors are getting more successful, we kind of start trying to poach things from them, and they're typically sort of the cast-offs that the Warriors did not.
They're hand-me-downs.
Yes,
yeah,
Keith Smart fit into that and, was not the brilliant tactician we hoped he would be.
No, he was not. 2012 to 2013, the following season, we go 28-54. The Power Balance Pavilion is renamed. Can you believe it didn't have a long and storied history? It becomes the Sleep Train Arena. Sleep Train Mattress Center is a big mattress chain, possibly nationwide, but especially big in Northern California.
Known as Mattress Firm now.
Mattress Firm now, yes, they've changed the name. But Sleep Train Arena, I found... And the joke was with Sacramento Kings fans that the name aptly described the play style of the team. They're going to put you out cold because, boy, are they a terrible basketball team.
Although the one good thing that it had was it sort of tied into Sacramento's history as a place where the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, had its westernmost stop. And they would play a train toot after each three-pointer made.
Toot, toot.
Yeah, exactly.
because, Sleep Train's little jingle used to be Sleep Train. Toot, toot, your ticket to a better night's sleep, which is a pretty good one.
Pretty good.
That's a good one.
Yeah, better than Mattress Firm.
Yeah, that's a weird one, isn't it?
A law firm exclusively staffed by mattresses. All right, anyway.
Pillow and duvet will defend you. That year, we drafted Thomas Robinson, 5th overall, out of Kansas. And again, he was supposed to be a Jason Thompson replacement who did not take. He is best known for getting suspended for 2 games after elbowing Jonas Jerebko in the throat in just his 11th game of play, and we traded him at the trade deadline. So we did not even have Thomas Robinson a full season.
No, he had some grit. Another guy who was this undersized power forward who was known as a rebounding specialist. Just the wrong type of player to put with DeMarcus Cousins in every way. I mean, really what you would want with DeMarcus is somebody who can sort of space the floor, but also provide some interior defense on the other end. And that was the exact opposite of what Thomas Robinson brought to the table. Body-wise, everything you want, but just didn't really know how to play basketball. And in a pattern that will be repeated, he was drafted right before Damian Lillard.
That's a shame. That's a shame. We also brought in that season stretch 4 Patrick Patterson, and we held on to Chuck Hayes. Again, we're trying to replace Jason Thompson. We're throwing everything we can at him. But that season, Jason Thompson started 81 out of 82 games. Guess who's back on our team? John Salmons, or as I call him, Salmons. He started 72 games and played 30 minutes a night, despite averaging 8.8 points a game on under 40% shooting from the field. Depressing statistics.
No chance a guy like that would sniff those types of minutes today.
No. Keith Smart was still a coach, but he got let go at the end of the year. Tyreke Evans, he had such a great rookie year, but year after year, he continued to go down and down in terms of his points per game. He was afflicted by plantar fasciitis and knee injuries. He played a very intense style of basketball that required a lot of moving to the basket and Euro steps and changing in direction. It just kind of wore on him. And, the peak of his career was really his rookie year. And part of it was the injuries. Part of it was just the inconsistency of the coaches and the players and the organization. And he also, too, he never really developed a very good three-point shot until way, way later in his career. And he just kind of couldn't adapt to the changing style of the NBA.
Had a mechanically flawed jump shot. Fell to the side every time he shot it, which looked cool, but was devastating for his consistency.
More DeMarcus Cousins mercurial
Mercuriality.
This was from Wikipedia. On November 11th, 2012, the NBA suspended DeMarcus Cousins for 2 games without pay for confronting San Antonio Spurs color commentator Sean Elliott, quote, in a hostile manner, end quote, after he criticized Cousins for attempting to bully Tim Duncan on the court. Cousins was apparently informed of Elliott's remarks after the game, and oh boy, he left the locker room and waited on the court for Elliott to finish his post-game show before confronting him. Some people criticized the suspension as overly harsh and based more on Cousins' reputation than what actually happened. Kinda true. While others said he needed to grow up and learn a lesson about confronting the media. Very true. Cousins apologized to Elliott in person before a game against the Spurs in March of 2014, which Elliott said he appreciated. Yeah, this was a tough one. You don't want a big, giant player who's super strong confronting, albeit an ex-player in Sean Elliott, but confronting a member of the media. It was just stuff like this where it's like, okay, Cousins, like, you've been in the league, 4 years now. This sort of stuff is we're too old for this. And there's just this pattern where it's kind of a victim complex he had where it's like, I'm being overly punished for my reputation. It's like, well, how'd you get the reputation?
Yeah.
You consistently and repeatedly made these sort of mistakes. So it was very difficult. It was a wonderful player, offensively especially, but just these off-the-court incidents were such big problems.
Took things very personally.
Yeah.
Was not able to sort of just let stuff go. As a professional athlete, you have to roll with the punches a bit in terms of criticisms from other media members. That's just something that comes along with the territory. And he was very easily baited into losing his temper. And this was probably the worst moment of that.
Month and a half later, December 22nd, 2012, DeMarcus Cousins was suspended indefinitely from the Kings, who accused him of, quote, unprofessional behavior and conduct detrimental to the team, end quote. The suspension was lifted 2 days later. Again, a pattern where we would sort of punish him and then, oh, we need you to play for us.
There was just a lot of incidents over the years with DeMarcus where it's just like, oh, man, come on, get out of your own way. Stop doing this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
In DeMarcus's defense, he was at one point probably the most talented center in the league and just could not get a winning team put around him to save his life.
Yeah, there were just too many of these incidents that were causing frustration for him. There were off the court. There were too many incidents on the court that were causing frustration, and it was just sort of a mess. The one bright spot, though, in May of 2013, the NBA approved Vivek Ranadive's ownership group, who are going to purchase 65% of the Kings from the Maloofs for $348 million. So cute, because the Celtics last year just sold for $6.1 billion. Now, the Sacramento Kings are not the Boston Celtics, but we're having teams back then selling for $348 million. This is 2013. I think the Mavericks 2 years ago sold for $4 billion. Celtics just sold for $6 billion. It's incredible how much these team prices have gone up.
The Lakers were just sold at a valuation of $10 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that is the reason why it just, at least for the last 20 years, has made no sense to be a cheapskate owner, because you will make your money back tenfold whenever you want to sell it.
The Maloofs, as part of the deal, have the team for one more season, but they're very much lame ducks, and Vivek is coming in and already making changes. So the Vivek era has begun, but the shit years continue. We're going to keep talking about them when we come back. All right, 2013 to 2014, the Kings record is 28-54. Before the season, we fired long-term GM Jeff Petrie, who had served since 1994. So we had 19 years as GM. Half the year's good, half the year's bad, would you say?
Yeah, I think got a little lucky with Weber falling into his lap, made a lot of good choices to surround him, but just could never really recapture the magic.
Nothing stinks like losing, and he had losing at the beginning of his tenure and a lot of years of losing at the end of his tenure. He was a 2-time executive of the year. I think the biggest struggle, too, is just the lack of financial support from the Maloof. So it would have been nice maybe to see him with Vivek and some more money, but Vivek is not also really known for, writing huge checks from the checkbook.
No,
but,
and the league moves fast, too.
Yeah.
And if you're a guy who's been in charge for 20 years, you really have to be one of the all-time best to maintain your hold on the game, because the stuff that works 10 years later doesn't work anymore.
Petrie was replaced by Pete D'Alessandro, who was not around very long and never had much power. The Kings this year make a great decision. They hire coach Mike Malone, who is certainly the best coach of the post-Adelman playoff drought era. He was basically the only coach who ever preached accountability and really the only coach who ever connected with DeMarcus Cousins. But, of course, later the Kings squander this. But for a while there, they were getting along pretty well, and the team was doing pretty well.
Yeah, there was a semblance of an identity. It was a much more defensive-oriented identity. Vivek, though, had come from the Golden State Warriors, and he really loved the fast-paced offensive style that they played. And that was not a natural fit with Mike Malone, who's known for being kind of tough-nosed, hard-driving type of personality.
Won a title with the Denver Nuggets recently. The Kings that year drafted Ben McLemore out of Kansas, 7th overall. He was a shooter who couldn't really shoot. For his career, he shot below 36% from three or around 36% from three, and he couldn't really do anything else, defense, etc., and he was out of the league before he turned 30. In December, the Kings trade a poo-poo platter of Chuck Hayes, John Salmons, Patrick Patterson, and Grievous Vasquez for Rudy Gay, who was a very good player with the Memphis Grizzlies. At the time, he was toiling on the Toronto Raptors. You guys probably heard me say Grievous Vasquez. We had acquired him in a sign-and-trade for Tyreek Evans the previous summer. Grievous Vasquez, we were really excited about him because with New Orleans the season before, he averaged double-digit assists. I think he led the league even in assists or just had a really good season, but it was absolute fool's gold. He was just a terrible, terrible point guard with us, and we only had him for 2 months. And we brought in Rudy Gay. And the team was pretty fun there for a while. We had Mike Malone as coach, Rudy Gay, DeMarcus Cousins, Isaiah Thomas. They were all averaging over 20 points a game, which you'd think, boy, the team would be great. We were still losing, twice as many games as we were winning. But you could kind of sense that, boy, this team is starting to put something together. We got a point guard, we got a wing, we got a big man. DeMarcus is a little less mercurial. Things are going kind of good. Did you have a little bit of hope at this time?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely thought the corner had been turned. In retrospect, 3 players who are minus players on defense are really hard to win, even if they're all scoring 20 points. And despite them playing positions that didn't really overlap, they were all guys who operated best with the ball in their hands. And Rudy Gay, despite being a very talented player, just kind of didn't bring the level of want that you need from a player of his caliber. And it seemed to be kind of just content getting the money that he was owed.
The next season, 2014-2015, the Kings go 29-53. We draft Nick Stauskas, 8th overall. Again, a shooter who could not shoot. He was never really great. He was nicknamed Sauce Castillo due to a closed captioning error that instead of calling him Nick Stauskas in the closed caption, it read Sauce Castillo, which I just don't know how that possibly could have happened. I guess closed captioning technology has gotten better. Another famous story with Nick Stauskas is Vivek Ranadivé, our new owner. Very corny gentleman. There's a clip of him in the draft room when the Kings are deciding to draft Nick Stauskas, and Vivek calls Nick on the phone, tells him, hey, we've drafted you, and Nick's, saying how excited he is to come to Sacramento. And Vivek has everyone in his war room, all his advisors, general manager, everything. He's like, all right, everybody, on 3, we're going to say Nick rocks. 1, 2, 3, and everyone goes, Nick rocks. And it just is one of the most cringe-inducing, horrendous moments ever captured on videotape of an owner. It just is so embarrassing. And again, just sort of conveyed that these Sacramento Kings, this is a shabby, rinky-dink operation.
Yeah, the best NBA owners are sort of like mafia dons.
Right.
Like they have this power and this aura around them that's cool, that makes guys want to come to them and, oh my God, they've got a lot of money. And whoa, do you see who he walked in with? Like if it's a celebrity, if it's his, trophy wife, there's all of these different things that sort of showcase status symbols. And Vivek a good man on the right side of a lot of social justice issues, and, kept the Kings in Sacramento, so gotta love him for that, but has just never projected this sort of aura that would be magnetic towards guys wanting to come and play for the Kings, and this is probably the peak distillation of that.
That season, DeMarcus Cousins sadly got meningitis, and he was out pretty much the first half of the season. During that time, before he had meningitis, the Kings were playing really well. We were above 500. DeMarcus catches meningitis, and Mike Malone and the Kings go 11-13 halfway through December while DeMarcus is out, and Mike Malone is sadly fired a year and a half into his tenure. Just a terrible decision by Vivek to hire Mike Malone, a coach who was clearly turning it around, giving us almost a 500 record in terrible circumstances. And he was replaced by Tyrone Corbin, became the interim coach, and the play just becomes terrible. The team completely quits on Tyrone Corbin.
Corbin was recently fired from the Jazz. I remember the Jazz had an awful season as well. So it was just like, we're firing the guy who's actually made our team somewhat good for the first time ever and replacing him with the guy who just got fired by a team that's even worse than us. Yeah. A head-scratching decision, made all the more painful in retrospect when Mike Malone lands with the Denver Nuggets and builds a team around Nikola Jokic, who is basically DeMarcus Cousins 2.0. Yeah. Better attitude, but a lot of the same skills, and
handle the ball, great on offense, could pass.
Yeah, and so just this wasted potential of a potentially fruitful relationship between the two of them.
During this time, it was January 23rd of 2015. Klay Thompson scores 37 points in the third quarter in a game against the Sacramento Kings. To this day, an NBA record. Really going to be tough to beat that one. Yeah. I think he went, I wrote it down here. In the quarter, Thompson shot 13 of 13 from the field and 9 of 9 from three. So just 27 points alone off three-pointers in one quarter. Later, during a game in February against the Suns, DeMarcus Cousins hit a game winner amid all these rumors that he's unhappy that the team is going to bring in George Karl to be the next coach to replace Tyrone Corbin. Those who don't know, George Karl had coached the Gary Payton, Sean Kemp Sonics in the 90s that went to the finals. He also clashed and coached Carmelo Anthony and the Denver Nuggets. But by this point, he was so past his prime, and Cousins, pissed off from all the carousel of coaches and all the instability of the organization, has a very emotional press conference after this game where he hits the game winner. I wrote down the quote here. This is from DeMarcus Cousins, just kind of freewheeling. I don't really know what question was asked, but this is what he says to the reporter. He says, quote, "I ain't pumped up. I've just got a lot on my mind. The crazy thing about it is, I've just got a question for y'all. How you going to stop God's plan? How you going to do that? How you going to do that? That's all I want to know. How you going to stop God's plan? Man, this city done put me through so much, and I stayed loyal to it the whole time. Yeah, I just want to know. How you going to stop God's plan? God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers. The marathon continues. I'm out." Shortly thereafter, George Karl was hired as the next coach of the Sacramento Kings. But yeah, that line, that monologue from DeMarcus Cousins, man, that is it sums him up. Yeah. It's this guy who is dramatic and incredible, and you can't take your eyes off him. But at the same time, there's a level of delusion, right?
Absolutely. Remarkable that he was still a believer after being with the Kings for as long as he was. And I think it was just a classic mistake that the Kings made over and over again. They brought in these old school disciplinarian, let's say it, white guys to whip DeMarcus into shape, like to tell him to cut it out. And we're not going to stand for this anymore. And Mike Malone had, like you would say, well, he does fit that archetype, but he was different. He sought to understand Cousins and see where he was coming from, as opposed to these other coaches where it's like, this is just a guy who doesn't know what he's talking about at all, and we're gonna force him to play basketball the right way. Where he was a natural force that needed to be harnessed correctly.
But like I said, despite Cousins' wishes, George Karl is hired and brought in to coach the Sacramento Kings. And when he comes in early on in his tenure, he has his first ever meeting with player Rudy Gay. And Rudy Gay infamously utters 4 iconic words to George Karl. What does Rudy Gay tell George Karl?
Welcome to basketball hell.
And thus concludes part 1 of Welcome to Basketball Hell. We'll be back next week to talk about more of the terrible playoff drought years of the Sacramento Kings, as well as our return to the NBA playoffs. But in the meantime, please subscribe, comment, and leave a rating. Send questions, comments, or big idea suggestions to our business email, flynnbrospod@gmail.com. Thank you to our producer, Will Slade, and we'll see you next time on the Flynn Brothers Podcast. Take care, buddy.
Buddy, you take care.